Duke refused to shake the commoner investor's hand. The next day begged on his knees for a meeting. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The carriage wheels rattled over the cobblestones as if they too were nervous. Eleanor Whitford smoothed her gloved hands over her skirts and tried not to show how tightly her fingers were clenched. There was no use pretending she was calm. Her mother saw straight through her as she always did. "You may still tell the driver to turn back," Mrs. Whitford said quietly. "No one forces you to stand in a room full of strangers and invite their judgment." Eleanor gave a small laugh that did not sound like laughter at all. "No one forces me," she said, "except the rent collector, the grocer, and the price of coal. Besides, I told Mr. Bexley I would attend. He has been kind to me. He expects me to speak this evening." Her mother's lips tightened. "Kind," she repeated. "Men are kind when it amuses them. Then they grow weary of the entertainment and change their minds. Promise me you will not mistake attention for respect." "I do not," Eleanor said. "That is why I brought the figures." She tapped the small leather folder on her lap. Inside were the notes she had prepared, neat columns of numbers, projected returns, and risks. She had worked on them by candlelight, long after her mother had gone to bed. The proposed venture was all anyone in certain circles spoke of. A grand improvement to connect inland fields to the ports by canal. To some, it was a visionary scheme. To others, a dangerous gamble. To her, it was an equation. The carriage slowed, then stopped before a tall townhouse ablaze with lamplight. Voices and laughter floated out when the door opened. A footman lowered the steps and helped them down. "Remember," her mother whispered, leaning close. "I owe them nothing beyond your manners." Eleanor nodded and lifted her chin, as if it were not her heart at stake, but only an evening. Inside, the air was warm with too many bodies, wine and polished wood. The drawing-room glittered with crystal and conversation. Gentlemen stood in small knots, their coats dark against the pale gowns of the ladies. Somewhere, a violin played. Somewhere else, someone laughed too loudly. Their host, Mr. Bexley, spotted them at once. He moved through the crowd with the ease of a man who knew the worth of every guest he greeted. "Miss Whitford," he said, bowing. "Mrs. Whitford, I am honored you have come. You are almost scandalously punctual." "I find tardiness more scandalous than punctuality, sir," Eleanor replied, managing a smile. He grinned. "You see," he said to the gentleman beside him, "sharp as a steel pen. Gentlemen, allow me to present the young lady who has perfectly predicted the last 3 trades I made and saved me from a disaster I was foolish enough to consider." A murmur, a few polite smiles, a few raised brows. "Miss," someone asked. "Whitford," Bexley repeated. "Daughter of the late Mr. Arthur Whitford, of mercantile fame." At her father's name, Eleanor felt that familiar pinch under her ribs. Some of the faces before her brightened with recognition. Others cooled. The failed venture had not been entirely forgotten then. For some, her father was still the man who had overreached and fallen. "Ah," one gentleman said. "Yes, I recall. A rather unfortunate business." "Yes," Eleanor answered calmly. "Unfortunate and not so simple as the rumors made it. But tonight we are here to discuss your future ventures, not my father's past." A few smiles, a few glances exchanged. Her tone had been very nearly bold, but Bexley laughed and patted her arm. "Exactly so," he said. "You will find Miss Whitford does not waste words. We will all be the better for it. Come, allow me to show you the table. We shall have our little presentation shortly. Until then, permit the room to admire you." "The figures, you mean," she murmured. "The mind behind them," he countered. "Now go and terrify some bankers." He moved away to greet other guests, leaving Eleanor and her mother near a side table covered in papers and a large map with lines drawn in ink. "Mrs." Whitford leaned close. "They look at you as if you were some strange animal," she said softly. "Half curiosity, half amusement." "I would rather be a curious animal than invisible," Eleanor replied. "At least this way they must decide what they think of me." "And you care what they think." She paused. "I care that they listen," she said. "If they listen, they will remember. If they remember, perhaps they will deal with me next season, or the one after. That is all." Her mother looked unconvinced, but she said no more. Eleanor watched the room with a practiced eye. She could almost see the invisible lines between people, the way some men shifted to include another as he approached, and others tightened their circle to exclude a less important guest. Titles floated around her like unseen crowns: Viscount, Earl, Marquis. She knew some of the names, others she had only read in the newspapers. Near the fireplace, a small group stood slightly apart, commanding a steady stream of attention. A tall man with hair as dark as his coat listened with a faintly bored expression as someone spoke to him, his posture easy, his presence unmistakable. People seemed to arrange themselves around him without thinking. "Is that—" she began. "Yes," her mother said under her breath. "That is the Duke of Hawthorne." The name rang like a bell. Everyone knew it. The Hawthorne estates were the stuff of conversation and envy. Acres upon acres of land, tenanted farms and ancient houses. The Duke himself was said to be severe, proud and meticulous, a man who took his responsibilities seriously and his own place in the world even more so. Eleanor had never seen him in person. Now she studied him with the same attention she gave a ledger. He was not handsome in a romantic tale's way, but there was something compelling in his features. A strong jaw, clear grey eyes, a line between his brows that suggested habits of frowning in thought. He stood with the absolute ease of someone who had never had to wonder whether he belonged in any room. He did not look the sort of man who enjoyed being contradicted. "Do not stare," her mother murmured. "I am not staring," Eleanor said. "I am assessing risk." Her mother snorted very softly, in a way that told Eleanor she was amused despite herself. Mr. Bexley called for the room's attention a short while later, clapping his hands lightly. "My friends," he said, "thank you for indulging my little experiment. You know we are gathered tonight not only to enjoy good wine and poor music, but to consider the practicalities of this canal venture. Before you are some numbers, some estimates, and a map. There has been much optimism spoken about it, but as we all know, optimism rarely pays the bills." A ripple of laughter. "To that end," he continued, "I have taken the liberty of asking someone with a remarkable eye for figures to examine the proposal. Some of you know her name already. For those who do not, I suggest you listen closely tonight and decide for yourselves. Miss Eleanor Whitford, if you please." The sudden shift of many eyes toward her was like stepping into a field of lanterns. For a heartbeat, the old fear rose. That she would open her mouth and no sound would come. That they would laugh. That her father's ghost would be dragged out into the center of the room, stripped of dignity. Then she remembered late nights at the small table by the window, the ink on her fingers. The clarity that came when numbers lined up and told the truth. She stepped forward. "Gentlemen," she began. "And ladies." A few women glanced at one another, faintly surprised to be acknowledged. "The plan before you is ambitious," she said. "If successful, the canal would indeed increase efficiency and profit for those who trade in grain and other goods. However, there are certain assumptions built into the figures that deserve a second look." One of the older gentlemen near the map smiled indulgently. "Surely you are not about to tell us," he said, "that a lady has discovered flaws in what 3 experienced men of business consider sound?" Eleanor met his eyes. "I am about to tell you," she said, "that the expected rate of return you have all been quoting depends on harvest yields remaining unusually high for at least 3 consecutive years. The last time that occurred, according to records, was nearly 20 years ago. You are also assuming that there will be no interruption in labor due to illness, weather, or political decisions affecting trade. In my experience, interruptions are more faithful than any man's promise." A low murmur. A few of the younger men leaned closer to the table, scanning the figures. "Miss Whitford," someone else said, a touch sharper, "if you topple all our assumptions, what do you recommend? That we take all our money and hide it under the mattress?" She allowed herself a small smile. "Only if your mattress pays 5% annually," she said. "Otherwise, I recommend adjustments, not abandonment." She moved closer to the map and pointed to a note. "If you reduce the initial investment by 10% and accept a slightly lower return over a longer period," she said, "you reduce your exposure to a bad year or 2. You also may consider partnering with existing road carriers rather than assuming you can immediately capture all their business. Shared risk is not as glorious as total control, but it keeps more men solvent." A few brows rose. One man looked over the notes she had provided. "She is correct about the last 10 years of harvest records," he said quietly. I have them in my own books. And who compiled these projections? Another asked. Your own clerk, sir, Eleanor replied gently. I only read them. There was a pause, then a cautious spatter of laughter. The older men exchanged a look that hovered between annoyance and reluctant admiration. Bexley stood to one side, his eyes dancing. Let us say then, he said easily, that the scheme is not foolish but over-optimistic, and Miss Whitford recommends moderation. A dull word, but a safe one. It is not dull to those who have lost everything, Mrs. Whitford murmured under her breath. Eleanor pretended not to hear. Questions followed. Some were genuine, others designed to test her. She answered as clearly as she could, keeping her tone respectful but firm. When someone suggested that women were naturally cautious and therefore unsuited to more daring ventures, she replied that daring was commendable when one was the sole bearer of its consequences. And when you are not, he asked. Then it is not daring, she said. It is irresponsible. Another ripple of laughter, sharper this time. Even some of the ladies smiled. Through it all, she was aware of the Duke of Hawthorne standing at the edge of the group, listening. He had not spoken yet. His gaze moved between the map, the papers, and her face. She felt it like a weight on her skin. At last, when the questions had dwindled, Bexley clapped his hands again. Enough figures for one evening, he said. Miss Whitford has given us much to consider. You may now drink to her prudence or curse her for spoiling your splendid fantasies, as you please. Miss Whitford, you have my gratitude. He bowed to her, and several men nodded or offered a brief word of thanks as they drifted away to speak with one another. The knot of listeners loosened. Conversation resumed in many corners of the room. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Her hands were trembling under her gloves. You did well, her mother whispered. They cannot say otherwise. They will say what they please, Eleanor answered, but at least I spoke plainly. She turned to move away from the table and almost collided with a dark coat. She looked up. The Duke of Hawthorne stood before her. Up close he seemed even more contained, as if nothing ever truly startled him. His eyes were cool and steady. Miss Whitford, he said. Your Grace, she replied, dipping a small curtsy. I have heard your analysis, he said. It was thorough. Thank you, she said carefully. Though, he added, I cannot say I share your aversion to risk. There are enterprises in which boldness is rewarded, not punished. Certainly, she answered, provided those who bear the risk also reap the reward, and those who bear the loss were allowed to choose it. His brows lifted very slightly. A moralist as well as a mathematician, he said. How rare. I do not think morality is rare, Your Grace, she said quietly, only inconvenient. For a second, something almost like interest flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone. Inconvenient truths are the ones people neglect, he said, until they themselves suffer. Yes, she said. That is very often the case. He looked at her for a moment longer, as if measuring how far he would allow this conversation to go. And tell me, Miss Whitford, he said, do you intend to build an entire career on advising men how to limit their ambitions? If their ambitions are built on sand, she replied, I think it a kindness to tell them before the tide comes in. A few nearby gentlemen had turned their heads toward them, curious to see how far she would go in answering him. Eleanor felt the attention and knew she walked a sharp edge. The Duke's mouth curved in something that was not quite a smile. Ambition, he said, is rather more than a calculation on a page. It may begin as a feeling, she said, but it ends as a sum, Your Grace, a sum that must be paid by someone. There was a small silence. Her mother shifted, nervous. At last, he inclined his head slightly. Your mind is sharp, he said, but sharpness can cut more than you intend. I am aware, she said. That is why I take care where I apply it. His gaze dropped very briefly to her gloved hand, where it rested by her side, the leather folder tucked under her arm. Then, perhaps because the moment required some gesture of civility, perhaps because others were watching, he straightened. In any case, he said, it is unusual to see a lady engaging in such matters. I should not like to think Mr. Bexley has lured you into them only for his own amusement. I entered them of my own will, she said, and I remain because I am good at them. A man nearby gave a soft chuckle. The Duke's eyes cooled a fraction. You are certain? He said. You do not aspire to the usual comforts of your sex. A quiet home, a reliable husband, and accounts no more complex than the weekly bills. I aspire, she said steadily, to a quiet conscience. The rest I will accept as it comes. There was a faint tightening around his mouth. Conscience, he said. Another inconvenient thing. He seemed about to say more, then glanced over her head. Someone was approaching. Their host. Your Grace, Bexley said, bowing. You have met Miss Whitford, I see. Allow me to say she has saved me from at least one foolish plunge. If you wish to preserve the glory of Hawthorne for another generation, you might do worse than heed her figures now and then. A few listeners laughed quietly, more at Bexley's daring than at his words. Hawthorne's expression did not change. The glory of Hawthorne, he said, has survived rather longer than any one adviser, Bexley. I do not believe it will sink or float on the opinion of a single, unconventional voice. The slight pause before the word told Eleanor exactly what he thought of that voice. Bexley, still smiling, turned to her. Miss Whitford, he said, you have not yet been properly presented to the Duke. Allow me, he gestured between them. Your Grace, this is Miss Eleanor Whitford. Miss Whitford, His Grace, the Duke of Hawthorne. Formality demanded some acknowledgement. Eleanor shifted the folder to her left arm and did what any person engaged in business would do. She extended her hand. It was a simple gesture. She had done it dozens of times with clerks and merchants. It was the ordinary seal of respect between people who expected to meet again and remember one another's names. The room was not quiet, but the space around them seemed to still. The nearest guests watched, pretending not to watch. The Duke's gaze dropped to her outstretched hand. His face did not change. The pause stretched. Then, very slowly, he clasped his own hands behind his back. He inclined his head just enough to be polite. Miss Whitford, he said, his tone cool and faintly dismissive. I am acquainted with your name now. That will suffice. He did not take her hand. The refusal was as clear as if he had spoken it aloud. Heat rushed to Eleanor's cheeks, so sudden she feared she must glow like a lantern. Her hand hung in the air for a heartbeat too long. She felt, rather than saw, the tiny shock that passed through those watching. A lady nearby gasped softly. Someone coughed. Then she withdrew her hand, steadying it against the leather folder, as if that had been her intention all along. Of course, Your Grace, she said, her voice even. I would not presume to demand more than a memory. Bexley's smile faltered. For a moment he looked as if he might say something, then thought better of it. The Duke, having delivered his silent judgment, turned his attention to a gentleman who had been waiting to speak with him about something entirely different. Conversation, which had hushed around them, resumed with a forced brightness that cut more deeply than open laughter would have done. No one openly remarked upon what had just occurred, but Eleanor felt it in the new caution of the glances sent her way. She was no longer simply the curious woman with a talent for figures. She was the woman whose hand the Duke of Hawthorne would not touch. Her mother's hand slipped through her arm. We should go, Mrs. Whitford whispered. Not yet, Eleanor said, though her throat felt tight. Leaving at once would make a spectacle of it. You are already their spectacle, her mother hissed. Then let them grow bored, Eleanor replied. We will go when we choose, not when his refusal pushes us to the door. She forced herself to move through the room, to speak briefly with those who approached. Some offered strained compliments on her presentation, as if that could disguise their discomfort. Others avoided her entirely, as if proximity might somehow offend the great man by association. Only Bexley dared to come near her after a quarter of an hour. Miss Whitford, he said softly. I am deeply sorry, that was ungenerous of him. It was entirely consistent, she answered. He has a clear understanding of rank, and I do not fit within it. You fit better within the numbers than most men in this room, he said. Numbers have no titles, she replied. They do not care who speaks them aloud. He shook his head. He was wrong, he said simply. That is all. Wrong, she said, and powerful. The combination is familiar. They left a short while later, once the weight of whispers grew too heavy to ignore. The carriage ride home was quiet for several streets. At last her mother spoke. He humiliated you, she said, deliberately, as if you were nothing, as if you were beneath his hand. Eleanor stared out at the dark city. I am not nothing, she said, and I am not beneath his hand. He only believes I am. That is his error. "And what will you do with his error?" her mother asked. "Turn it into interest," Eleanor said slowly. "They will talk of it tomorrow. They will say, 'Did you hear? The Duke of Hawthorne refused to take that woman's hand.' And someone else will say, 'What woman?' And someone else will answer, 'The one who saw through Bexley's canal scheme.' My name will travel with my figures, whether he intended it or not." Her mother made a doubtful sound. "You find advantage in everything," she said. "I try," Eleanor said. "It is that, or drown in it." She did not sleep much that night. The scene replayed over and over behind her eyes. His still face, his hands clasped firmly behind his back, the way the space between them had filled with invisible cold air. She had told herself that she needed no man's approval. Yet the sting of his refusal pierced deeper than she wished to admit. By morning, the anger had cooled into something harder, like glass. She rose, dressed, and went to her small desk by the window. If society would speak of her, then she would give them something to talk about beyond the cruelty of a proud duke. She wrote letters, answered inquiries, and reviewed the notes for a possible partnership someone had mentioned to her the week before. Her mind, once engaged, pushed aside the bruise on her pride. On the other side of the city, in a quieter, grander house, the Duke of Hawthorne sat in his study, sifting through estate correspondence. The memory of Eleanor Whitford's outstretched hand flickered through his mind now and then, not entirely comfortably. He pushed it away, telling himself he had done nothing improper. A duke could not be expected to treat a commoner lady who played at investment as if she were his equal. A footman appeared at the door. "Your Grace," the man said, his face pale. "There is an agent here from the North Estates. He says the matter cannot wait. He insists upon seeing you at once." Hawthorne frowned. "Send him in," he said. Moments later the agent entered, hat in hand, his expression grave and strained. "Your Grace," he began, voice tight, "I am afraid I bring very serious news regarding the Whitmore partnership and the credit extended upon your northern lands." For a moment the room seemed to narrow around the agent's strained face. "Speak plainly," Hawthorne said. "What has happened?" "The Whitmore partnership has collapsed, Your Grace," the man answered. "Mr. Whitmore has defaulted on his obligations entirely. The creditors mean to press their claims at once." Hawthorne's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. "Whitmore cannot simply collapse," he said. "He has assets, land, warehouses." "Not enough to satisfy what he owes," the agent replied. "He drew against your name, Your Grace, against the expected profits of the northern harvests, the proposed improvements, and the contracts tied to them. With his failure, the lenders turn to the surest security they possess." "The Hawthorne estates," Hawthorne said flatly. The agent swallowed. "Yes, Your Grace." There was a brief silence. Outside, a carriage rolled past, its wheels faint through the thick walls. "How exposed are we?" Hawthorne asked. The agent pulled several folded papers from his case. "These are the figures," he said. "I have done my best to estimate. If the creditors press for immediate repayment and no accommodation is reached, a considerable portion of the northern lands could be seized or forced into sale. The tenants would suffer. Your reputation would be altered." "Altered," Hawthorne repeated. "That is a delicate word for ruin." He took the papers and scanned them. The columns of numbers spoke more clearly than the agent's hesitant phrases. Whitmore had extended himself recklessly, confident that the Hawthorne name would steady him. The lenders, equally confident, had granted more lenient terms than they otherwise would. Now that confidence turned like a blade. "Whitmore assured me," Hawthorne said, "that his private ventures would not touch my estates." "Assurances do not weigh in the balance as heavily as ink, Your Grace," the agent said quietly. "His signatures and yours appear together on too many documents." Hawthorne felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with physical strain. "Has word of this reached London?" he asked. "Not yet in its full severity," the agent said, "but it will. Lenders talk among themselves. Clerks talk. By the time the week is out, there will be whispers. By the end of the month, there may be printed hints in the newspapers, depending on how matters proceed." Hawthorne placed the papers on the desk, aligning their edges with unnecessary care. "Leave these with me," he said. "You will inform no one else of the scale of our exposure. If anyone asks, you will say only that there has been some inconvenience with the Whitmore accounts, which is being addressed." "Yes, Your Grace." I will send instructions, Hawthorne said. Until then, make no commitments on my behalf. The agent bowed and withdrew. When the door closed, Hawthorne remained motionless for several seconds, staring at the numbers as if they might rearrange themselves under his gaze. They did not. He reached into a drawer, took out a small key and opened the inner compartment where his most private documents lay. Contracts, bonds, letters from bankers. He spread them out and traced the path of Whitmore's influence, the connections that had seemed so beneficial when the partnership began. He had thought himself prudent, demanding collateral and written terms. He had believed his name a shield. Instead, it had become a bridge upon which Whitmore's debts now marched into his house. He needed time to reassure the lenders, time to arrange new credit, time to cut away the rot without losing the tree. And time, above all, was the one thing men never truly controlled. By the end of the day, his London banker had been summoned. The man arrived with ink-stained fingers and a narrow, careful expression. "You must understand, Your Grace," the banker said after reviewing the papers, "that the markets are sensitive. Any hint that the Hawthorne estates are under strain will cause creditors to stiffen their terms. If we move quickly, we may prevent the worst of it. If we hesitate, others will act for us." "I have no intention of hesitating," Hawthorne said. "What are my options?" "You might sell some non-essential properties," the banker said. "Townhouses you do not use, hunting rights, shares in certain ventures. It would raise immediate capital." "The non-essential properties," Hawthorne said, "are precisely those that provide ready money in lean years. I will not strip away the fruits to save the branches. Is there no other course?" The banker hesitated. "There is always another course, Your Grace," he said, "but some are unpalatable. You might seek a new alliance, a fresh partner with capital and appetite for land, someone willing to extend credit on generous terms in exchange for influence over certain decisions." "You speak as if you have someone in mind," Hawthorne said. "There are always men with money," the banker said, "and a few women as well, though society speaks of that less freely. Of late, there has been talk of a certain investor here in London, someone with a keen eye for opportunity, who prefers to remain discreet. They have taken positions that suggest they look beyond immediate show and consider the long view. If you could find such a person and convince them to ally with you rather than with your rivals, much might be salvaged." "And if I cannot?" Hawthorne asked. "Then you must sell what you do not wish to sell," the banker said, "or face the consequences when the creditors grow impatient." Hawthorne dismissed him with fewer words than politeness demanded. He could not abide the thought of inviting a stranger into the heart of his estates, giving them a say in decisions that had always rested in his family's hands. Yet he could not ignore the figures. That night, while London slept or danced, rumours began to slip from desk to desk, from clerk to clerk, from whispered conversation in one counting-house to a similar murmur in another. "Have you heard? Whitmore has gone under, with Hawthorne tied to him. Impossible. Nothing is impossible when men trust their own names too much. It will not touch the Duke. A man like that does not fall. We shall see." By the end of the week, the whispers had found their way to drawing rooms and dinner tables. They did not name the sums, they did not speak openly of ruin, but they did suggest that the Duke of Hawthorne was, for the first time, vulnerable. In a modest house several streets away from the fashionable squares, Mrs. Whitford set down a folded newspaper with a sharp breath. "Listen to this," she said. "It speaks of inconveniences in certain agricultural partnerships in the north, and of a great name that may be forced to make adjustments." "It does not name the great name," Eleanor said, setting a teapot on the table. "It does not need to," her mother replied. "There is only one house they hint at, the Hawthorne estates. They say nothing directly, but the shape of it is clear." Eleanor dried her hands and took the paper. She read the small column, the careful phrasing, the suggestion without outright statement. "The surest towers feel the wind first," she read aloud. "They make a poem of it. They make entertainment of it," her mother said. "They will enjoy seeing him scramble." Eleanor's eyes lingered on the words. "He humiliated you," her mother said. "I cannot pretend it does not please me to see his pride shaken." "I do not rejoice in other people's misfortune," Eleanor said. "You are kinder than I am," Mrs. Whitford replied. "I have not forgotten how they spoke of your father when things went badly for him. They did not pause to consider that other people might suffer. They will not pause for Hawthorne either. They will only smile more quietly while they sharpen their knives. Eleanor set the paper down. His tenants, she said, his workers. They will not find it a pleasant poem if the estates falter. His tenants are not your concern, her mother said. Every estate's tenants are someone's concern, Eleanor answered, even if those someones prefer not to think of it. Her mother sighed. You cannot mend the world by balancing its ledgers, she said. No, Eleanor agreed, but I can refuse to profit from certain kinds of ruin. She meant it. Yet when, later that day, a letter arrived from Mr. Bexley asking whether she might advise on a matter touching certain northern lands and potential acquisitions, she opened it with more interest than she would have liked to admit. The letter was brief. My dear Miss Whitford, you will have heard by now the whispers about the Whitmore failure and its consequences. It seems parts of those northern arrangements may soon be available for those with the sense and means to act quickly. I have been approached by an old acquaintance, Lord Wycliffe, who takes a keen interest in such matters. He has heard of your talents and expressed a wish to meet you. I believe you might find the conversation mutually beneficial. If you are willing, I should like to arrange a small private gathering where we may discuss the possibilities. I assure you, your independence will be respected. You will be under no obligation to agree to anything you do not judge wise. Yours, etc. Samuel Bexley. Eleanor read the letter twice, then a third time. You look as if he has offered you the key to a kingdom, her mother said dryly. Perhaps only the key to a door in its wall, Eleanor replied. But even a small door is useful if one wishes to choose whether to go in or out. Bexley wishes to involve you with Hawthorne's lands, does he not? Her mother asked. You see the name without it being written. Yes, Eleanor said, or at least with contracts that touch his lands. And he wishes me to meet Lord Wycliffe. Her mother frowned. I know the name, she said. He is not as grand as Hawthorne, but he is no minor figure. They say he is clever, and that he smiles more than he should. They say the same of foxes, Eleanor said. Foxes survive by taking what others do not guard closely, her mother replied. You must guard yourself. I always do, Eleanor said. The small gathering Bexley arranged was held in a more modest room than the previous soirée. No glittering crowd, no music. Only a polished table, a map, a tray of tea and 3 chairs. Lord Wycliffe arrived with unhurried grace. He was handsome in a way the Duke of Hawthorne was not, his features smoother, his smile easier, his blue eyes bright with good humour that never quite reached their depths. Miss Whitford, he said, bowing, I have heard so much of you that I began to suspect you were an invention of Bexley's. I am relieved to find you are real. It would be most inconvenient to negotiate with a myth. I assure you my figures are more solid than myth, my lord, she said, though I cannot speak for my reputation. Bexley chuckled. Be wary, Wycliffe, he said. She has a tongue as sharp as her pen. Wycliffe smiled at Eleanor. A sharp tongue can be very useful, he said, provided it is attached to a mind that knows when to use it. And when not to, she asked. He inclined his head. Exactly so. They sat. Bexley unfolded the map of the northern region. Lines marked boundaries, rivers, and villages. You are already aware, Bexley said to Eleanor, of the trouble with Whitmore. Lord Wycliffe believes that certain parcels of land and associated contracts may soon be available at advantageous terms. Available is a polite word, Eleanor said. One might also say, pried loose from a wounded hand. Wycliffe's smile did not falter. Commerce is rarely gentle, Miss Whitford, he said. The question is whether we leave matters to those who care nothing for the land and only for quick profit, or whether we, who might manage them with some regard for their future, step in. And your regard for their future is disinterested, she asked. I do not claim sainthood, he said. I claim only efficiency. The Hawthorne lands are valuable, but their current encumbrances make them fragile. With the right investment and restructuring, they could be made both profitable and stable. If, however, those controlling them refuse help out of pride, the result will be worse for everyone. Hawthorne is not a man who welcomes help, Bexley remarked. I am aware, Wycliffe said. We have crossed paths before. There is no love lost between us, but I do not seek to embarrass him. I seek opportunity. If I acquire certain debts and contracts from his creditors, I can offer him terms better than any stranger would. He may refuse. If he does, I am not obligated to stand still and watch his house fall. I am free to act in my own interest. "And where do I enter this picture?" Eleanor asked. Wycliffe leaned back in his chair. "I have capital," he said, "but not without limit. I also have a name that makes some people suspicious when I appear too eager. You, Miss Whitford, have shown that you understand both risk and restraint. You have, if I may say so, a reputation for seeing beyond immediate advantage. I would like you to join me in this. Your investments, your judgment, my connections, my title." "And in return?" she said. "In return," he said, "you would share in the profits. You would also gain leverage, influence, a say in how the land is managed. If Hawthorne agrees to our terms, we become his partners. If he does not, we become his creditors. Either way, we are in a position to ensure the estates are not torn to pieces by 10 different hands. And you," she said, "gain a measure of control over a rival." He smiled. "I will not insult you by denying it," he said. "But I will say this. The alternative is not that Hawthorne remains as he is. The alternative is that others take advantage where we do not. Men who will not invite a woman to the table with them. Your invitation is very flattering," she said. "It is not flattery," he replied. "It is practicality. I have read your analyses. I have spoken to men who have profited by taking your advice. You see patterns others miss. I prefer allies who can see." She looked down at the map. The inked boundaries might as well have been marks on a ledger. Behind each line lay cottages, fields, lives. Her father had once spoken of the Hawthorne estates as something distant and unassailable, like a mountain. Now they lay on a table in front of her, as numbers and potential adjustments. "Miss Whitford," Bexley said gently, "you need not decide at once. We are asking you to consider nothing more." "What terms do you propose?" she asked. Wycliffe's eyes brightened almost imperceptibly. "I propose," he said, "that you and I share equal say in any major decisions. No agreement will be made with Hawthorne without your approval. You will have full access to all figures and documents. You will invest what you deem wise. I will match it and add further sums as required. Profits will be divided proportionally, losses as well. If at any point you feel the enterprise has become untenable, you may withdraw your capital with fair notice, and I will assume full responsibility." "It sounds generous," she said. "It is sensible," he answered. "I have no wish to trap an unwilling partner. I would prefer you remain because it suits you, not because you cannot escape." "What assurances do I have," she said, "that my name will not be used to shield decisions I did not approve?" "You will have a written agreement," he said, "signed and witnessed, one that makes clear who bears responsibility for which choices. You have learned, I think, the cost of vague arrangements." Her gaze flickered briefly. He had touched the wound of her father without naming it. "I do not wish to profit from another man's collapse," she said. "Even if that man once refused to take my hand." Wycliffe regarded her steadily. "Do you believe," he asked, "that your father would have refused a chance to stabilize a great estate, if doing so could also secure his family's future and give him the power to prevent abuses?" Her throat tightened. "My father," she said, "would have read every line 3 times before he agreed." "Then do the same," Wycliffe said gently. "Read every line. Ask every question. If you conclude that this is merely a scavenger's game, walk away, and I shall not press you again. If you conclude that your presence might lessen the harm that is already coming, then join me, and we will proceed carefully." She folded her hands. "I will need to see the exact terms you propose," she said, "and I will draft my own conditions. If we cannot agree on them, there will be no partnership." "Of course," he said, "I would expect nothing less." They parted with polite bows. Bexley walked her to the door. "You do not trust him," he said quietly. "I trust that he wants something," she replied. "I trust that he is clever. I trust that he does nothing without calculating the benefit. That is enough trust for now." "And Hawthorne?" Bexley asked. "What of him?" she said. "If you do this," he said, "you will, in effect, hold some portion of Hawthorne's fate in your hands." She looked at the grey sky beyond the window. "Perhaps," she said, "but fate is a grand word. In practice, I will hold numbers. He will choose what to do with them." Over the next days, letters passed between her and Wycliffe, proposed terms, counter-proposals, neat lines of writing that gradually shaped an agreement. She insisted on clauses that protected her independence, that made clear she was not bound to any course she judged unjust. Wycliffe accepted most of them, quibbled over a few, and yielded enough to satisfy her that he meant to keep his word, at least as long as it suited him. Mrs. Whitford watched the process with unease. "You are tying yourself to men who live in a world that devoured your father," she said. "I'm tying myself to paper," Eleanor said. "If the paper burns, I walk away." "You say that as if men with titles always let women walk away," her mother replied. "Then I will run," Eleanor said, half lightly, half not. At last, a final version of the agreement lay on her desk. All that remained was to sign it in Wycliffe's presence, with Bexley as witness. "The day after tomorrow," she said, reading the note confirming the appointment. "At 3 o'clock. Her mother stared at the date. "Once you sign," she said, "there may be no easy unsigning." "I know," Eleanor said. She slept restlessly that night. In her dreams, the map of the Hawthorne lands blurred into the old contracts her father had once trusted, and Lord Wycliffe's easy smile mingled with the cool eyes of a duke who would not touch her hand. In another part of London, Hawthorne was hearing a different version of the same story. His banker had returned, this time with a different manner, less cautious, more urgent. "Your Grace," he said, "the situation develops quickly. One of your principal creditors has sold a portion of Whitmore's obligations to another party." "To whom?" Hawthorne demanded. "To Lord Wycliffe," the banker replied, "and he is not acting alone. There is someone behind him, someone who has agreed to invest a considerable sum, on the condition that they share equal say in how any arrangement with you is framed." "Who?" Hawthorne said sharply. "That," the banker said, "was not initially clear. They have been discreet, but I have made inquiries. There is a name that appears quietly in several recent transactions, one that was not taken seriously at first. It seems we were all too slow to observe the pattern." "Whose name?" Hawthorne said. The banker hesitated only briefly. "Miss Eleanor Whitford, Your Grace," he said. "She is the investor who stands behind Lord Wycliffe, and in 2 days' time she is expected to sign an agreement that will give her a decisive voice in matters concerning your northern estates." For a moment Hawthorne did not understand the banker's words. "Say that again," he said. "Miss Eleanor Whitford," the banker repeated. "She is the investor behind Lord Wycliffe. By all accounts, she will sign the agreement the day after tomorrow." Hawthorne's hand tightened on the edge of the desk. "That is impossible," he said. "Miss Whitford is a young lady of modest means who amuses herself with figures. I met her only recently. She spoke well enough, but you will not persuade me she commands the capital to move my estates." The banker did not flinch. "With respect, Your Grace, your information is out of date," he said. "Over the past 2 years, she has made a series of clever, carefully timed investments, some through intermediaries, some directly. Small sums at first, then larger. She has compounded her gains, quietly. If she chooses to commit a portion of her resources to this arrangement with Lord Wycliffe, it will be significant." "And you knew none of this?" Hawthorne demanded. "I knew of transactions," the banker replied. "I did not see the pattern at once. There was no reason to link them to a single mind. Only when her name appeared in connection with Wycliffe did I look more closely. Others will do the same now." Hawthorne turned away, pacing to the window. The memory of her stood there, annoyingly vivid. The level gaze, the precise voice, the hand he had refused to take because his rank would not bend. "You tell me," he said quietly, "that a woman I publicly slighted now holds the ability to dictate terms to me." "I tell you," the banker said, "that in 2 days' time she will unless you act first. It may be that she would prefer to deal with you directly. You have not yet given her the chance." Hawthorne's jaw tightened. "I am not in the habit of courting favor from commoners," he said. "You are not in the habit of needing to," the banker answered. "Times change." The words stung. Hawthorne turned back. "If I approach her," he said, "what then? I kneel before the woman and beg her to forgive an injured hand and an injured pride." The banker hesitated. "I do not advise on matters of pride, Your Grace," he said, "only on matters of solvency. If you do nothing, Lord Wycliffe and Miss Whitford will sign their agreement. They will then choose whether to offer you terms or to let events take their course. If you speak to her before that, you may have some influence on the shape of those terms. Perhaps more." "Perhaps," Hawthorne repeated. "You ask me to abase myself on a perhaps. I ask you to consider what it will cost if you do not," the banker said. "The land does not care for pride." It cares for weather, labor, and the terms under which credit is extended. At present, those terms are turning against you." Hawthorne dismissed him. When he was alone, he sank into his chair and pressed his fingers to his temples. Of all the names that could have risen from this tangle of debts and contracts, it had to be hers. Miss Eleanor Whitford, the woman whose hand he had rejected under a dozen watching eyes, the one whose calm voice had undermined half a room's assumptions about a canal. He had thought of her afterward more than he liked to admit, irritated by his own lingering awareness of the look in her eyes when she withdrew her hand. Now that same hand might soon sign an agreement that would place part of his future under her control. He rose abruptly and rang for a servant. "Send for my mother," he said. "Ask the Dowager Duchess to join me here." When the Dowager entered, she carried with her the scent of starch and lavender and the weight of a lifetime's certainty. "You look harassed," she said by way of greeting. "I hope we are not reduced to selling the family silver. I have grown fond of it." "We may be reduced to selling more than silver," Hawthorne said. "Sit down, mother. There is something you must hear." He told her in broad strokes of the Whitmore collapse, the creditors, and the figure of Lord Wycliffe moving among them like a patient predator. When he reached Eleanor's name, his mother's eyebrows rose sharply. "A commoner girl," she said, "playing at investments, and you tell me she now has power to trouble us." "She is no girl," Hawthorne said. "She is a woman with a mind for figures, and yes, she has allied herself with Wycliffe. Between them, they may soon hold enough of our debts to force us into whatever arrangement pleases them." "And what do you intend to do?" his mother asked. "Bow to them?" He hesitated. "I intend," he said, "to speak with Miss Whitford before she signs anything. If she has any sense, she will see that associating too closely with Wycliffe carries its own risks. I can offer her stability, he cannot." "You would offer her anything?" the Dowager demanded. "After she has placed herself in opposition to you." "Placed herself," Hawthorne repeated. "I placed myself in opposition to her the moment I treated her as beneath my courtesy." His mother pursed her lips. "You are a duke," she said. "You must remember that. You do not chase after commoners and apologize because they have learned to shuffle figures on a page. She has chosen her company. Let her live with it. We will weather this storm as we have weathered others." "This storm is different," he said. "It strikes at the foundations, not the branches." "If that is so," she replied, "then cut away some lands. Sell whatever parcels are least essential. Sacrifice pieces to save the whole. But do not make a spectacle of yourself before a woman who would dine out on the story for years." He looked at her, seeing in her face the creed that had shaped his childhood. Hawthorne's did not bend. They did not apologize. They endured and expected others to do the yielding. "That strategy has already cost us more than you know," he said. "What do you mean?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nothing," he lied. "For now, I must decide how far I am willing to go to preserve the estates." "Go as far as reason demands," she said. "But remember who you are. Remember that every eye watches for any sign that Hawthorne is weakening." When she had gone, he stood alone at the window, watching the pale London sky. "Remember who you are." At this moment he was a man whose lands could be seized by strangers, a man who had allowed arrogance to sour his judgment, a man who might soon be forced to answer to a commoner woman for decisions on fields his family had held for generations. He thought of the way she had extended her hand, not boldly, not coyly, simply expecting that a civilized man would respond in kind. He had refused her, not because there was anything unclean about that hand, but because it offended his sense of order to treat her as his equal. Now that same hand held papers with the power to squeeze his estates. He reached a decision. "Tell the coachman to have the carriage ready in half an hour," he told the servant. "I will be going out." "Shall I inform anyone of your destination, Your Grace?" the servant asked. "No," Hawthorne said. "No one. I am visiting a lady." The servant's eyes flickered, but he only bowed and withdrew. The next day passed in a blur of arrangements and restless thought. He obtained Eleanor's direction easily enough. Such things could be discovered without making public inquiries. He learned, too, from his banker that the signing with Wycliffe was set for 3 o'clock on the following afternoon. "After that," the banker had said, "any approach you make will be under different terms. You would be negotiating with a partnership already formed, not preventing it." So his window was narrow. He spent the evening going through more papers, seeking any alternative he could stomach. There were none that did not involve losses he refused to accept. Selling minor properties might cover the immediate calls, but not the full weight if all creditors demanded at once. He needed someone with capital and patience. He needed her. The realization sat ill with him, but he did not push it away. The following day dawned grey. Eleanor sat at her writing table, the neat stack of contracts before her. The ink on them was as yet incomplete. Only her signature remained absent. Mrs. Whitford watched her, a teacup cooling untouched in her hand. "You are still not certain," her mother said. Eleanor traced a finger along the margin of the top sheet. "I am certain of the terms," she said. "I am less certain of the man who will be sitting opposite me when I sign." "Lord Wycliffe," her mother said, "or the shadow of the Duke behind him?" "Both," Eleanor answered. "If I do this, I step into a ring where they have been circling each other for years. They know every advantage, every pressure point. I know only what they show me." "You know more than they expect," her mother said. "Perhaps," Eleanor said, "but I am not foolish enough to believe I am invulnerable simply because I can add and subtract." There was a knock at the door. The servant's voice floated up the stairs. "Miss Whitford, ma'am? A message from Mr. Bexley. He asks that you confirm 3 o'clock at his rooms and wishes to assure you that all is prepared." "Tell him yes," Eleanor called. "I will be there." When the servant had gone, Mrs. Whitford set down her cup. "I must say it again," she said. "I do not like this. You stand between men of power who have never considered your welfare before. If something goes wrong, they will not fall. You will." "If something goes wrong," Eleanor replied, "it will be because I misread the figures. I accept that." Her mother gave her a long, searching look. "There is another thing," she said. "Once you sign, you tie a part of your life to the Hawthorne name, whether he wishes it or not." Eleanor smiled faintly. "He already tied my life to it when his house allowed my father to be ruined," she said. "The difference now is that I will have a say in how the knots are pulled." Her mother flinched. "You never speak of that," she said. "I thought you had put it aside." "I set it on a higher shelf," Eleanor said. "I did not forget it." She rose. "I should dress," she said. "If I am to sit across from a lord and a banker, I would rather not do it in my morning gown." She went upstairs and chose her clothes with unusual care, not because she wished to impress, but because she wished to arm herself. A dark, plain gown that did not show smudges of ink, gloves without frayed seams, a bonnet simple enough not to invite ridicule, neat enough not to invite pity. By 2:30 she was ready. The contract lay in her reticule, folded precisely. "Do you wish me to accompany you?" her mother asked. "No," Eleanor said. "This is a conversation among those who will bear the risk. It would not be comfortable for you." "It will not be comfortable for you either," Mrs. Whitford said. "Comfort," Eleanor said, "is a luxury. Today I am buying something else." She kissed her mother's cheek, took her reticule and descended the stairs. The servant hurried to open the door for her. "Your carriage, miss." He stopped. His eyes widened in surprise. Eleanor frowned. "What is it?" she asked. "A gentleman, miss," the servant said. "He has just arrived. I was about to show him into the parlour." "What gentleman?" she asked. The servant hesitated, as if he could not quite believe the words he was about to say. "The Duke of Hawthorne, miss," he said. For a second, Eleanor thought she had misheard. "The Duke," she repeated. "Here?" "Yes, miss," the servant said. "He asked for you by name." Her heart gave a hard, unpleasant thud. "Where is he?" she asked. "In the front hall," the servant said. "I did not wish to seat him without your leave." Eleanor drew a breath. Her first impulse was refusal. She could send him away with a message that she was engaged, that her time was already promised, that he must seek his solutions elsewhere. But curiosity rose alongside anger. Why would a man like that come to her house unannounced on this particular day? "Show him into the sitting room," she said. "I will come." She set down her reticule on the hall table and smoothed her gloves once more, as if neat buttons could steady her. Then she walked to the door of the small sitting room and entered. Hawthorne stood near the window, his figure almost too large for the modest space. The room, with its worn rug and simple chairs, seemed to draw back from him. He turned when she came in. For the first time since she had met him, there was no boredom in his face, only tension. "Miss Whitford," he said. "Your Grace," she replied, her tone cool. You have taken me by surprise. That was unavoidable, he said. Had I given you warning, you might have refused to see me. I might still refuse, she said. The day is not yet over. He inclined his head slightly. Then allow me to speak quickly, he said. What I have to ask is not easily said, and I have very little time in which to say it. She remained where she was, near the door. You chose not to take my hand when courtesy offered the choice, she said. Now you ask me for time. Why should I give you what you would not give me? A flicker of color touched his cheekbones. I was wrong, he said. You may believe I have not said those words often in my life. I did not recognize the full measure of your position. I misjudged both your importance and your character. That is part of why I am here. Only part, she asked. He grimaced. The rest, he said, is necessity. You know of the Whitmore collapse. You know what it has done to my affairs. You have been invited to tie yourself to Lord Wycliffe in a way that will give you influence over my lands. I am not so blind that I cannot see how dangerous that alliance will be to me, and how beneficial it may be to me, she said. Yes, he agreed, and to Wycliffe. He gains an ally whose reputation for prudence will soften perceptions of his appetite for control. You gain access and power. I lose what my family has held for generations, or I submit to terms set by a man who has never wished me well. And where does your repentance over a refused handshake enter this picture? She asked. He drew a breath. If my apology matters at all to you, he said, let me give it now. I treated you as beneath my regard. I allowed my pride of birth to override simple civility. It was unworthy. I cannot undo the insult, but I can begin to act as if I recognize your true position, which is not below mine in this matter. Silence hung between them for a moment. She watched him, searching for mockery, for some hint that this was performance only. She did not find it. Very well, she said at last. You have apologized. What is it you ask? He looked at her directly. Speak with me, he said. Before you sign anything with Wycliffe, hear what I can offer you instead. If you still choose to stand with him afterward, I will not trouble you again. You wish me to break with him, she said. I wish you to consider dealing with me directly, he replied, without his shadow between us. I will grant you terms as favorable as he would, perhaps more so. You would gain what you desire without tying yourself to a man whose interests do not align with yours. And what do you know of my desires? She asked. He hesitated. I know you care for more than numbers, he said quietly. I heard it in the way you spoke of risk and who bears it. Wycliffe cares for profit and leverage. He will use you so long as you serve those ends. I would prefer to treat you as a partner, not a convenience. You speak well, Your Grace, she said. Better than you did when we first met. Desperation improves a man's manners, he said dryly. To her surprise, the corner of her mouth twitched. And how desperate are you? She asked. Desperate enough, he said, to come to your house without announcement. Desperate enough to stand in a room that does not suit me and ask a woman I injured to save what I was born to protect. Her gaze sharpened. Stand? She repeated. He understood. Slowly, as if acknowledging a private sentence, he sank to one knee on the worn carpet. The sight shocked her more than she had expected. A duke on his knee in her small sitting room, under the watchful gaze of her mother peering from the doorway and the servant hovering in the hall. Your Grace, she said, startled. Get up. Not until you promise me one thing, he said. What do you ask? She demanded. That you will not sign with Wycliffe, he said, until you have heard in full what I propose, that is all. She glanced at the doorway. Her mother's eyes were wide, her hand pressed to her throat. Close the door, Eleanor told the servant. No one is to come in until I call. The servant obeyed, retreating and drawing the door almost shut. Mrs. Whitford remained just visible, her expression a mixture of alarm and reluctant fascination. Get up, Eleanor said again. If you remain like that, my neighbors will imagine I am refusing a proposal of marriage. Would you refuse? He asked, half in bitter humor. Yes, she said promptly. At present, I would. Now get up. I dislike speaking down to anyone, even a duke. He rose. The moment of shock passed, leaving a quieter tension behind. You have my promise, she said. I will hear you before I sign. But you must also hear me. There are things you do not yet know that may affect whether you wish my involvement at all. He frowned slightly. "What things?" he asked. "Not here," she said. She crossed to the door and spoke softly to her mother. "I must speak with His Grace in private," she said. "There are matters of business that concern us, you know what I mean." Her mother's face changed, understanding dawning. "Those papers," Mrs. Whitford whispered. "You mean to show him?" "Yes," Eleanor said. Her mother hesitated, then nodded. "I will sit in the front room," she said. "If you need me, call. If he forgets himself, I will raise the street." "Nothing will happen that you cannot speak of in church," Eleanor said. "I promise." She closed the door to the front hall and then led Hawthorne to the smaller inner parlour, a room used mostly for serious talk and winter evenings. It held a table, 2 chairs, and a bookcase. "Sit," she said. He obeyed. She went to the cabinet where she kept her most important papers, unlocked it, and drew out a tied bundle. "You came to speak of terms," she said. "Before we discuss those, you must understand the full history between your house and mine." "I do not believe our houses have much history," he said. "Until the other night I had never heard your name." "That is part of the problem," she said. "Your father heard it. Your steward heard it. Your tenants and my father's creditors heard it very well indeed." She set the bundle on the table and untied the string. Letters, agreements, and copies of ledgers lay within. On more than one, the Hawthorne seal was pressed into the wax. Hawthorne stared at the familiar crest stamped in red and black, suddenly cold. For a moment Hawthorne only stared at the seal, as if it had no right to be there. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "From my father's desk," Eleanor said. "After his death. They were among the papers he kept locked away. My mother could not bear to look at them. I could." She slid the top letter toward him. "You may recognize the hand," she said. "It belongs to your late father's steward, Mr. Harrington." Hawthorne's mouth hardened. "I know Harrington's hand," he said. "He served my father for 20 years. He kept the estate books." "Yes," she said. "He kept them. And he kept certain truths from daylight as well." He unfolded the letter. The paper crackled. "Old but not fragile. To Mr. Arthur Whitford," he read softly. "Regarding the matter of our joint venture in Northern Transport, I have made such adjustments as were necessary to ensure that any resultant shortfall does not appear in the Hawthorne ledgers." He broke off. "Go on," Eleanor said. His eyes moved down the page. "Your own accounts as a merchant are more flexible in public opinion, and it will therefore be less damaging if the loss is carried under your name. You will be compensated in private by certain concessions from our side, which we may arrange at a later date, once the present storms have passed." He looked up sharply. "You expect me to believe," he said, "that my father sanctioned this?" "Turn to the next letter," she said. He did. The handwriting there was different, neater, more commanding. "Your father wrote that one," Eleanor said quietly. He read it, his jaw clenched. "Harrington," he read, "I approve your suggestion. It is imperative that no stain attach itself to the Hawthorne estates at this time. Mr. Whitford is an honourable man and will bear the loss bravely. See that he is given every informal assistance you can contrive, but keep our name out of the official accounts." He finished, then lowered the letter slowly. Silence filled the room. "My father wrote this," he said at last. "I recognize the signature, the phrasing, but this cannot be the whole story." "It is enough of it," Eleanor said. "The venture failed. My father bore the loss in public. Your house bore it in private. When creditors asked who had miscalculated, only one name was spoken aloud. Whitford. Hawthorne remained unsullied." "Harrington wrote of compensation," Hawthorne said. "Did your father receive any?" She shrugged one shoulder. "Some small favours," she said. "Delays on certain payments, gentle words in some quarters. None of it mended his reputation. Once people believe a man has failed, they prefer the story to the truth." He stared at the letters again, as if trying to will them to say something else. "My father was a man of honour," he said. "I do not doubt he believed that," she replied. "But he chose to place that honour above my father's good name. He chose silence when speech would have saved us. It may be that he meant to make amends later. Men often intend such things. The moment passes. They grow used to the comfort of being believed innocent." His hand tightened around the edge of the table. "How long have you known this?" he asked. "Since the year after my father died," she said. "I was going through his papers to settle what little remained. I found this bundle. I read every line, twice. And you did nothing? He demanded. You could have taken this to a solicitor, to a paper. You could have accused us openly. Yes, she said. Why did you not? He pressed. She met his eyes. Because I knew very well how the story would be told, she said. It would be written as a tragic tale of a great house brought low by an ungrateful merchant's daughter who would not let an old matter rest. They would say my father sought to drag a noble name into the mud to lift his own. They would question the authenticity of the letters. They would call me embittered. And you cared what they said? He asked. I cared, she said, that the tenants on your lands and the workers in what remained of my father's business would bear the brunt of the upheaval. Creditors do not punish only the man at the head table. They punish everyone. He sat back, shaken. You have carried this for years, he said. Without speaking? I spoke, she said, to my mother, to myself, to ledgers. Paper listens, if no one else does. He closed his eyes briefly. My father was not the monster you might imagine from this letter, he said quietly. He was stern, proud, but he believed he did his duty. So did mine, she said. They both believed they were doing what was necessary. Only one of them had a title to shield him from the consequences. He opened his eyes again. Why show this to me now, he asked. If you wished revenge, you might simply sign with Wycliffe, tighten the noose, and let rumor and debt do their work. I did not say I wished revenge, she said. You cannot pretend you feel nothing, he said. You stood in a room and watched me refuse your hand, knowing what my house had already cost yours. It would be inhuman not to feel the temptation to strike back. She inhaled slowly. Of course I feel it, she said. I'm not made of stone. When your banker told you my name, I imagine he enjoyed the irony. I have considered more than once what it would mean to take these letters and show them to those who once turned their backs on my father. To see them look at the hawthorn crest and realize they had misjudged. And yet you did not, he said. And yet I did not, she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. What do you want, Miss Whitford? He asked. Truly, not in polite phrases, not for the sake of any bargain. What do you wish to happen? She looked down at the papers, then at him. I want my father's name cleared, she said, publicly, without condition, without evasion. I want those who whispered about his supposed greed and incompetence to know they were wrong. I want my mother to walk into a room and not see people lower their voices because they remember a scandal. He nodded once. That, he said, can be done. I also want, she continued, to prevent your estate from being carved up by men who see it only as a set of figures. I do not care for you personally enough to wish you comfort for its own sake, Your Grace, but I care that tenants are not thrown from their homes because you were too proud to accept help from anyone not born with a crest. His mouth tightened. Fair, he said. Painful, but fair. And, she said, I want to prove that what I do, what I know, has value beyond being an amusing curiosity at a London supper. I want the work I do to change something real. You have just described, he said slowly, the very things I am least practiced at giving: public admission of fault, shared power, and visible change. Then you must decide, she said, whether you will learn new habits. He let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. And if I refuse? He asked. She gathered the letters and retied the bundle. Then I shall sign with Lord Wycliffe this afternoon, she said. I will use what influence I gain to moderate his worst impulses if I can. And if I cannot, I will withdraw my capital and let him bear the consequences alone. As for these papers, perhaps I will burn them. Perhaps I will keep them on the same high shelf where my father's memory rests. Either way, you will have chosen not to know the full cost of your father's decisions. He watched her fingers on the string. And if I agree? He asked quietly. She met his gaze. Then I will not sign with Wycliffe, she said. I will invest in your estates directly. I will design a plan to satisfy your creditors and restructure your obligations. In return, you will sign your own papers. They will state, in clear words, that my father bore blame that was not his, and that the Hawthorn house benefited from that silence. They will also name me as your partner in financial matters, with a voice you are bound to respect. Finally, you will commit to certain reforms on your land. Written, not merely spoken. You ask a great deal, he said. Yes, she said. Do you have a great deal to mend? He looked down at the letters again. His face was drawn. My father is not here to answer, he said. I am being asked to confess to a sin I did not myself commit. If you prefer, she said, you may phrase it as a regret, that you have learned since his passing of an injustice he allowed, and that you wish to set it right. The exact words are less important than the fact that they are spoken. And my own offense? He asked. Do you require me to apologize publicly for your hand as well as your father's? She gave him a brief, cool look. I believe you have apologized where it matters, she said. The rest is between us. Silence stretched. He reached for the bundle and held it as if it were heavier than paper. I do not like yielding, he said. Neither do I, she answered. I have yielded my whole life. To gossip. To men who thought a woman had no place at a counting desk. I am done with that. If you agree to this, it will be because you see it is the only way to preserve what you value. If you do not, then we waste both our time. He sat for another long moment. Then he nodded once, decisively. Very well, he said. Draft your terms. I will read them. If they are as you have described, I will sign. She felt a small, sharp release of breath she had not known she was holding. In that case, she said, I must also send a note to Mr. Bexley. Lord Wycliffe expects me at 3 o'clock. Will he be pleased to receive your refusal? Hawthorne asked. I doubt it, she said, but my obligation is to my own judgment, not to his expectations. She rose and went to her writing desk. He watched as she took a sheet of paper and dipped her pen. What will you tell him? He asked. That circumstances have changed, she said. That I cannot in conscience proceed with an agreement that places me in direct opposition to someone whose tenets may bear the weight of our contest. That I thank him for his confidence and hope he will forgive my withdrawal. And he will? Hawthorne asked. He will not, she said, but he will pretend to. She wrote quickly, folded the note, sealed it, and rang for the servant. See that this is delivered at once to Mr. Bexley, she said. Personally. Yes, miss. The servant left. Silence settled again, lighter now as if some invisible knot had loosened. You understand, Hawthorne said after a moment, that by refusing Wycliffe, you may make an enemy. She gave a small shrug. I suspect he was never truly a friend, she said. At worst, I lose the protection of his name. At best, I avoid being drawn into a feud that is older than I am. And you gain a more troublesome ally, he said. That remains to be seen, she replied. He almost smiled. Very well, he said. What happens next? Next, she said, you bring me everything. All your contracts, all your debts, all your ledgers. Nothing held back. If we are to steady this ship, I must know its leaks. My steward is in the country, he said. He will not like handing the books to a stranger. Your steward may adjust his liking, she said, or he may look for work elsewhere. I do not bargain with half-truths. He studied her face. You are certain you wish to tie yourself to this? He asked. Once we begin, you will be exposed to every unpleasant story, every rumor, every sharp word from those who do not approve of a woman in such a place. I am already exposed to their sharp words, she said. I might as well earn them properly. He laughed, a short, surprised sound. You are unlike anyone I know, he said. You should meet more people, she replied. They spent the next hour sketching the outline of what needed to be done. He explained the structure of his estates, the particular vulnerability of the northern lands, the more stable holdings elsewhere. She asked questions that cut through his assumptions. When he spoke vaguely of obligations, she demanded numbers. When he mentioned customary allowances for certain dependents, she asked what they cost and why. More than once he bristled. You strip everything to its bones, he said. Nothing is sacred. Some things are, she replied, but sentiment does not pay interest. He found himself conceding points he would have argued fiercely with any other advisor. When she suggested cutting certain expensive entertainments and consolidating some properties, he started to object. It would look like retreat, he said. It would look like prudence, she countered. You can call it what you like. If you cling to every outward sign of power, you may lose the power itself. You speak as if appearances mean nothing, he said. They mean a great deal, she said, but they mean nothing if the substance beneath them rots. He fell silent. Then he nodded. You are right, he he said. I do not like it, but you are right. Get used to that feeling, she said. Our work together will produce it often. When he finally rose to leave, the afternoon light had shifted. I will have the necessary papers sent to you, he said. If you prefer, you may work at my London house. It will be easier to consult with my people there. That may be wise, she said. But I warn you, Your Grace, I will not be treated as a curiosity. If I come, it will be as someone with the authority to say no. You will be treated, he said slowly, as someone whose no I must heed. She watched him as he moved to the door. One more thing, she said. He paused. Yes? When you stand up before your peers, she said, and speak my father's name, you must not sound as if you are swallowing poison. If you cannot do that genuinely, do not do it at all. I will not be content with a cold legal notice sent to a newspaper. I require sincerity. He looked at her. In public, he said, I have performed sincerity more times than I can count. It is the coin of our realm, but this, I think I can manage the real thing. See that you do, she said. He inclined his head once more and left. Weeks passed. They saw one another often, always in rooms filled with ledgers, maps, and the quiet scratch of pens. At first, their conversations were strictly practical. Your tenant here pays too much in rent for what the land yields, she observed one afternoon, pointing to a column. If I lower it, I lose income, he said. If you do not, she replied, he will exhaust the soil and default in 2 years. Then you will have an empty farm and a ruined man on your conscience. Choose your loss. He frowned, then gave a reluctant nod. Lower the rent, he said, on condition that he rotate his crops as you suggest. Done, she said. On another day, he brought her a list of minor properties in town. These can be sold without touching the core, he said. They are valuable but not essential. She ran her eye down the page. This one, she said, tapping a line, produces more income than you think if managed properly. Do not sell it. Raise the rent slightly, improve the tenant's terms, and watch how he responds. You are very confident in these predictions, he said. Confidence is not magic, she said. It is memory. I have seen similar patterns. Men behave as groups more predictably than they believe. Gradually, their talk widened. He asked about her father, about how she had learned to read ledgers so young. I watched him, she said. When he came home late, tired and worried, the only thing that soothed him was putting numbers in order. I thought, if they could comfort him, perhaps they could comfort me. So I learned to speak their language. Did he want that for you? Hawthorne asked. He wanted security for me, she said. He would have preferred I gain it through a good marriage and a mild husband, but he did not live long enough to arrange either. The numbers were more reliable. In turn, she asked about his childhood. Did you always know you would be Duke? She said. Yes, he answered. From the time I could understand words, everyone around me spoke as if my life were already written. I was told what I would manage, what I would represent, whom I could not be seen with. And did you ever wish to be something else? She asked. He thought for a moment. Sometimes, he said. Sometimes I wished not to be seen at all. But duty does not permit that. Their rhythm changed without either of them naming it. There were moments when his hand brushed hers as they reached for the same ledger. Moments when she looked up and found him watching her with a softness she did not know where to place. One evening, after a long day of negotiations with a particularly stubborn creditor, he walked her to the door of his London house. You have given up much of your time, he said. You could have pursued other ventures instead. I've pursued others as well, she said. I'm not entirely dependent on your crisis, Your Grace. I know, he said, and yet without you we would be in a far worse position. I am grateful. She smiled faintly. You say that as if the word tastes strange, she said. It does, he replied, but I am learning. As their plan took shape, word began to spread in quieter circles that the Hawthorne fortune, though shaken, was being managed with unusual steadiness. Creditors found their fears answered with clear numbers and credible schedules. Tenants, hearing of small reforms and new terms, breathed easier. The worst of the storm passed without becoming a public spectacle. Not everyone was pleased. Lord Wycliffe paid a call on Eleanor one afternoon without Bexley. You vanished from our arrangement with very little warning, he said. I confess myself disappointed. She poured tea with a steady hand. Circumstances changed, she said. I informed you as soon as they did. Yes, he said. You chose to ally yourself with my rival rather than with me. An understandable choice for the heart, perhaps, but for the head, questionable. Her cheeks warmed. My choice was for the estates, she said, for the people on them. Hawthorne was willing to accept terms you might not. You believe that? He asked. I know it, she said. I wrote the terms. He signed them. There are other ways to bring a man to heel, Wycliffe murmured. You chose a gentler path. I wonder if you will find it satisfying. Satisfying, she repeated. This is not a game to amuse my vanity, my lord. It is work, necessary work. He studied her for a moment. You are a rare woman, Miss Whitford, he said. I regret losing you as an ally. But I do not make enemies of those who choose differently than I wish. If you ever find that your present partnership does not give you what you hoped, my door remains open. I appreciate the sentiment, she said, even if I do not trust it entirely. He smiled. Wise, he said. I hope Hawthorne knows what he has gained. I fear he has not yet begun to understand it. After he left, she sat for a while thinking of his words. What did he want? Her mother asked. To see whether I regretted my choice, Eleanor said. And do you? Her mother asked. She shook her head. No, she said. I do not. By the time winter pressed its cold fingers against London windows, the plan was nearly complete. One final piece remained. You have delayed this, Eleanor said one afternoon at Hawthorne's house, tapping a folded paper on the table. You sign everything else promptly, not this. He looked at it. The public statement, he said. Yes, she replied. The one that clears my father's name, the one that invites your peers to hear you say aloud what lies in these letters. He exhaled. I am not delaying, he said. I am considering how to do it in a way that makes it impossible for anyone to dismiss. I do not care how they respond, she said, only that they hear it. You say that, he replied, but you deserve more than a notice buried in the back of a newspaper. You deserve the same kind of room that once watched you be dismissed. She paused. What do you mean? She asked. I intend to invite them, he said. The men who saw me refuse your hand, the ones who knew your father's name only as a cautionary tale. I will speak there. You will be present if you wish. When I say that Arthur Whitford was wronged, and that his daughter has saved the Hawthorne estate from greater damage, they will have to look at you as they hear it. That is not necessary, she said quickly. It is, he answered. If I am to atone, it must be where the sin occurred. She looked at him, startled by the word. You are serious, she said. Yes, he said, and I will sign this now to prove it. He took up his pen and signed the statement with a firm hand. Then he slid it to her. Will this suffice? He asked. She read the words. They were clear and direct. Yes, she said softly. It will. Their eyes met over the paper. For a moment the ledgers and contracts between them seemed to fade. There was only the knowledge of what they had walked through together, humiliation, revelation, reluctant trust. After this gathering, he said quietly, after your father's name is restored, there is another matter I wish to discuss with you. What matter? She asked. He smiled slightly. Numbers can wait, he said. This cannot, but it is better left for another day. She felt a flicker of something she refused to name. As you wish, Your Grace, she said. He stood and offered his arm in an ordinary gesture of courtesy that now felt like something more. Come, he said. Let me see you to your carriage. We have a great deal yet to prepare, and I would have you reach home before the streets turn to ice. As she placed her hand on his arm and walked beside him, Eleanor realized that the world she had known a year ago, the world where dukes refused her hand and her father's name was a shadow, had already changed beyond recognition. The night of the gathering arrived with a hush over the city, as if London itself were waiting to hear what would be said. Eleanor stood before the small looking-glass, fastening the last ribbon on her gown. It was not new, but she had had it altered. The fabric fell cleanly, without frills, the color deep enough to flatter but not to boast. Around her throat, she wore a simple pendant that had been her father's, a small silver disc with no ornament but a tiny engraved W. Her mother watched from the chair by the bed. You look like yourself, Mrs. Whitford said, not like someone dressed to impress strangers. That is fortunate, Eleanor replied. I have no intention of becoming someone else for their comfort. Her mother's hands tightened in her lap. "Are you certain you wish to do this?" she asked. "You could have let him send a notice to the papers and be done. This is a spectacle." "It is a correction," Eleanor said quietly. "The spectacle already occurred. They watched him refuse my hand. They watched my father fall. Tonight they will watch something else. And if they sneer," her mother pressed. "Let them," Eleanor said. "I will not live my life arranging myself around their sneers." She lifted her cloak. "Come," she added. "We will be late, and I refuse to walk in after every curious eye has settled." The carriage ride passed mostly in silence. Mrs. Whitford fiddled with her gloves. Eleanor watched the streets slip by, the lamplight turning windows into bright, fleeting rectangles. "Do you trust him?" her mother asked suddenly. "Which him?" Eleanor replied. "The man or the Duke?" "Either," Mrs. Whitford said. Eleanor considered. "I trust that he will do what he has promised tonight," she said, "and I trust that he feels the weight of it. As for everything beyond that, we will see." "That does not sound like a heart given away," her mother murmured. "My heart," Eleanor said, "has learned to wait for evidence." The carriage stopped. The same townhouse where she had once stood, her hand rejected, loomed before them, lit and lively. Inside, the atmosphere was like the night of the first gathering, yet different. The same crystal, the same polished floors, the same murmur of conversation. But tonight, Eleanor could feel threads of attention already tugging in her direction. "There she is," someone whispered. "That is the woman, is it not? The one with the figures." "And the Duke," another voice said quietly. "Have you heard? He has done something unheard of. He has made her his, what did they call it, partner. Partner in ruin, perhaps," someone else murmured. Eleanor walked forward as if she heard nothing. Bexley approached them, bowing with genuine warmth. "Miss Whitford," he said. "Mrs. Whitford, welcome. I am honored you came. You seem to make a habit of inviting us to evenings that alter our lives," Eleanor said dryly. "Then I hope this one will leave a better taste in your mouth than the last," he replied. "You have my word that if anyone behaves like a fool, it will not be my doing." "You cannot control a duke," Mrs. Whitford said. "Tonight," Bexley answered, "I am not so sure of that." He turned as a new arrival came into view. Lord Wycliffe, elegant as ever, moved through the crowd with an easy smile. When his eyes fell on Eleanor, he changed course and joined them. "Miss Whitford," he said, bowing, "I see I was right to say Hawthorne does not yet understand what he has gained. Tonight, he will discover it in front of all his friends." "Or enemies," Eleanor said. "In this room," Wycliffe replied. "Those are often the same people." His gaze softened. "Do not be anxious," he added in a lower tone. "You're on the right side of history this evening. That is more than most of us can say at any party." "I thought you disliked losing," she said. "I dislike boredom more," he answered lightly. "And I must admit, you have made the outcome far more interesting. I shall enjoy watching our noble friend swallow his pride. I will enjoy it even more knowing you insisted he do so with grace." He stepped back as a rustle passed through the room. Heads turned toward the doorway. The Duke of Hawthorne had arrived. He wore black as usual, but there was a deliberate simplicity to it tonight. No showy embroidery, no unnecessary ornament. He greeted the host, nodded to acquaintances, endured a few obvious attempts at curiosity disguised as politeness. Then his gaze found Eleanor. For a moment, that was all, a look across the center of the room. The last time they had stood in such a circle of eyes, he had refused to meet her halfway. Tonight he moved toward her without hesitation. "Miss Whitford," he said when he reached her. "Mrs. Whitford." "Your Grace," Eleanor replied. Her mother dipped a stiff curtsy. "You honor my daughter tonight," Mrs. Whitford said. "I hope you mean it." His jaw tightened. "I do," he said simply. Bexley clapped his hands for attention, saving them from further awkwardness. "My friends," he called, "if you will indulge me for a few moments, our host of honor this evening has something to say. I suggest you listen carefully. It is not every day that a duke invites witnesses when he chooses to speak of his own errors." A stir. Some exchanged skeptical looks. Others leaned forward, eager. Hawthorne stepped into the center of the room. There was no platform, no grand chair, only a cleared space and many faces. He glanced once at Eleanor. She gave the smallest nod. Then he began. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, You are accustomed to hearing men in my position speak of duty, of tradition, of honor. I have done so myself often enough. Tonight, however, I must speak of something less comfortable. Correction. The room grew quiet. Years ago, he continued, my father entered into a partnership with a merchant of this city. Some of you will remember the name. Mr. Arthur Whitford. You may also remember that when the venture failed, blame attached almost entirely to him. My house remained untouched in reputation, while his bore the burden of public disapproval. There was a small murmur. A few older men exchanged looks. Mrs. Whitford's hand closed around her daughter's arm. Recently, Hawthorne went on, I learned that the fault was not his alone. Decisions were made in my father's name by a steward he trusted, decisions that shifted loss away from our ledgers and onto Mr. Whitford's. My father approved these measures, believing perhaps that quiet assistance afterward would make up for the public damage. It did not. Mr. Whitford's name suffered in circles that knew nothing of private concessions. A woman near the wall whispered, I remember. My husband refused him credit after that. Hawthorne's voice remained steady, but Eleanor could see the effort it cost him. I cannot ask you to judge my father with my eyes, he said. I loved him. I respected much of what he did. But love must not blind us to harm. The fact remains, Arthur Whitford bore more blame than he should have. My house benefited from that silence. That is an injustice. I will not allow it to stand uncorrected while I bear the title of Hawthorne. He paused, letting the words settle. Therefore, he continued, I state clearly and without qualification that Mr. Arthur Whitford was an honorable man. The venture he shared with us did not fail through his greed, incompetence, or dishonesty. Any who repeated such tales did him wrong. His eyes moved over the crowd. Some of you may have done so without knowing better. I forgive you for that, he said. But I ask you now to replace the story you carried. When you speak his name in future, speak it with respect. Eleanor's throat tightened. Her father's name, spoken like that in such a room, sounded strange and clean. Hawthorne went on. There is more, he said. Not long ago, at a gathering not unlike this one, I met his daughter. You know her as Miss Eleanor Whitford. Some of you were present when I allowed my pride and prejudice to override simple courtesy. I did not take her hand when it was offered. I dismissed her publicly. It was a small gesture in your eyes, perhaps. To her it was a humiliation. To me now it is a source of lasting shame. He turned to face Eleanor fully. I was wrong, he said. I was wrong in that moment, and I was wrong in the assumptions that led to it. Miss Whitford possesses a mind more precise than most men I have met in matters of finance. She has also shown more integrity than any I could name, including myself. A hush spread. No one moved. When the Whitmore collapse exposed dangerous weaknesses in my own affairs, Hawthorne said, it was she who offered me a path that preserved not only my estates but my conscience. She might have chosen vengeance. She did not. She chose a partnership instead. Under the eyes of those who once saw me reject her, I choose to offer what I withheld then. He stepped toward her. The circle parted to make room. He stopped at a respectful distance. For an instant, they might have been alone. Miss Whitford, he said, his voice quiet but carrying, will you take my hand now? Every breath in the room seemed to pause. Eleanor stood very still. She could feel 100 eyes on her. The memory of that first refusal pressed against the inside of her chest. A younger version of herself would have wanted to refuse him, to watch him feel what she had felt. Instead, she saw her father, bent over a ledger. She saw tenants whose lives had steadied under the reforms she had insisted upon. She saw the man before her struggling against the habits of a lifetime. She lifted her hand. He extended his. This time, when their palms met, his grip was firm and steady. No hesitation, no reluctance. The room exhaled. Someone clapped once, impulsively. Another followed. Within moments, a ripple of applause spread, uncertain at first, then more sure. It was not entirely for him. Hawthorne released her hand but did not step away. I also wish you to know, he said to the room, that Miss Whitford is not merely an advisor I consult when it suits me. From this day forward, she is my acknowledged partner in all financial matters concerning my estates. Decisions will bear both our judgment. Contracts will carry both our names. If you wish to deal with Hawthorne, You must learn to deal with Whitford as well. That produced another stir. Some in the room looked startled, others looked impressed. A few looked displeased. Wycliffe smiled faintly as if enjoying the spectacle. Bexley, standing by the fireplace, gave Eleanor an encouraging nod. Hawthorne inclined his head to the gathering. "That is all I meant to say," he concluded. "You may now return to more pleasant topics. I assure you mine will be occupied with ledgers again tomorrow." The room broke into clusters once more, but the air had changed. People came forward, cautiously at first, to speak to Eleanor. "Miss Whitford," one gentleman said, "I did not realize I misjudged your father's case. I see that now." "Your words do not mend the past," she answered, not unkindly, "but they may shape what you say in future. That will be enough." A lady leaned close. "You must be very brave," she whispered. "I could hardly stand while so many watched." "Bravery," Eleanor replied, "is sometimes only the refusal to move when your knees want to bend." Later, Wycliffe found her near a window. "Congratulations," he said lightly. "You have managed to make half the room feel both guilty and fascinated. That is quite a trick." "I did nothing," she said. "He did the speaking." "You did everything," Wycliffe corrected. "You gave him the chance and the terms and the courage. Do not underestimate your own influence, Miss Whitford. It will be your undoing if you do." "Do you regret losing our alliance?" she asked. "I regret losing the pleasure of working beside you," he said. "But I am not blind. You have chosen the larger game. I bear you no ill will. Just remember, you have tied yourself to a man who carries the weight of an ancient name. That weight can bow even a strong back." "Then I will stand beside him and share it," she said. He smiled. "I do not envy him his debts any longer," he said. "I envy him you." He bowed and melted back into the crowd. At some point, Eleanor became aware that Hawthorne had vanished from the center of the room. She scanned the faces, but he was nowhere in sight. Her mother tugged at her sleeve. "Go and find him," Mrs. Whitford said softly. "He said he had more to speak of. It may be tonight he means to do it." "And if he means to speak only of business?" Eleanor asked. "Then you will know," her mother replied. "And if he means something else, you should know that as well." Eleanor slipped out of the main drawing room and into a quieter corridor. She found an open door leading to a smaller library. The fire there burned lower, the room half-shadowed. Hawthorne stood by the window, one hand on the back of a chair, the other resting on the sill. He turned when she entered. "I wondered how long before you escaped," he said. "I might say the same," she replied. He gave a faint smile. "I have spent a lifetime in rooms like that," he said. "They tire me now more than they used to. Tonight, especially." "You did well," she said simply. "Did I?" he asked. "Some of them looked as if I had announced an intention to sell the estate and become a dancer." "You surprised them," she said. "They built a picture of you in their minds. You changed it. People do not like seeing their pictures spoiled." "And you?" he asked. "Did I meet your expectations?" She hesitated. "You exceeded them," she said. "Not because you spoke perfectly, but because you spoke plainly. My father would have been astonished to hear his name on your lips like that." "Would he have forgiven us?" Hawthorne asked. "I do not know," she said, "but I think he would have respected the attempt, and he would have liked the figures." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the noise from the other room a muted hum. "There is something else," he said at last, "something I have meant to say for weeks. Tonight seems as good a moment as any, if you can bear another declaration." "Another?" she said. "You are becoming very skilled at them." "I have had an excellent tutor," he replied. "You taught me that words must match deeds. I have spent some time ensuring I could match these before I spoke them." Her heart began to beat faster. "Go on," she said, keeping her voice light. He moved closer, not enough to crowd her, but enough that she could see the small lines at the corners of his eyes, the tiredness and something else. "When you first came into my notice," he said, "I saw only a challenge to my habits. A woman where I expected a man. A commoner where I expected an equal in rank. I was foolish enough to think those things mattered most. I refused your hand because I feared what others would say if I acknowledged you openly." "I remember," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "I have tried since then to do more than remember. I have tried to understand what lay beneath that fear. Pride, certainly. Cowardice, if I am honest. but also a narrow idea of what my life could be, of what sort of woman could stand at my side. "And what sort is that now?" she asked. "The kind who will tell me when I am wrong," he said. "The kind who will not be impressed by my title or silenced by my displeasure. The kind who will look at a field and see not only crops but families. The kind whose mind I trust more than my own when it comes to decisions that matter." "You value my mind," she said. "That is clear. But a partnership of numbers is one thing. A partnership of lives is another." "Yes," he said quietly. "That is what I have come to speak of. Numbers we have already agreed upon. I wish to know whether you could imagine sharing something far less orderly." Her breath caught. "You speak of marriage," she said. "Yes," he answered. "I speak of marriage, not as a rescue for you or an adornment for me, as a joining of equals, as far as the law will allow it, and further in practice." She looked away for a moment, gathering herself. "You must know," she said, "that marriage is no light step for a woman. If I say yes to any man, I risk losing what I have built, my independence, my income, my right to be taken seriously. If I say yes to a duke, the risk is greater. Your world will expect me to shrink into a place that does not fit me. I cannot and I will not." "I do not wish you to shrink," he said. "I wish you to expand, to take up space I did not know could be filled. I cannot change every law, but I can make vows that bind me more strictly than any statute. If you marry me, your investments remain your own. Your income remains yours to manage as you see fit. You will have your own accounts, your own projects. You will not be folded into my name like an entry in a ledger." "And your family?" she asked. "Your mother?" He grimaced. "My mother will not rejoice at first," he admitted. "She dreamed of alliances with titles and acres, not ledgers and ink. But she has also seen what you have already done. She knows I could not have steadied the estates without you. She may complain. She may attempt to freeze you with glances. I will not allow her to succeed. The household will know that you are mistress in more than name. Those who cannot accept that may find other employment." "You say that now," Eleanor said. "It is easy to be bold in a quiet room." "It was not easy to speak in that crowded one," he replied. "Yet I did. Judge me by what you have seen since I knelt in your sitting room, not by the way I behaved before." She met his gaze again. There was no flippancy in it, only earnestness and a forming hope he was trying very hard to hide. "I have conditions," she said. "I would expect nothing less," he answered. "If I marry you," she said, "my mother must have a home with us, or near us, as she prefers. She has borne too much to be left alone in some rented house while I go off to live in comfort." "Agreed," he said at once. "She shall have rooms in my house or a cottage on the estate, whichever she chooses." "I must retain my right to advise and to refuse," she went on, "not only on matters of business, but on anything that touches the land and the people on it. If I see a wrong, I will speak. You must promise to listen, even if you dislike what you hear." "I promise," he said. "I may argue, but I will listen." "And there must be truth between us," she said. "No quiet letters sliding blame from one name to another. No decisions made in shadow because they are easier than facing the light. If I am to tie my life to yours, I will not live in a house built on concealed ledgers." He nodded. "Truth," he said, "as far as we can bear it, and when we cannot bear it, we will learn." She drew a breath, letting his words settle. "You have answered quickly," she said. "You may regret so many promises later." "I have spent half my life refusing to promise anything that might bind me," he replied. "I think it is time I bound myself to something worthy." "Worthy," she repeated. "You," he said simply. The quiet in the room deepened. "You have not yet said whether you feel anything for me," she said, the words awkward on her tongue. He smiled, a little crookedly. "I have been speaking around it in longer sentences," he said. "Let me be plain now. I love you, Eleanor. I have tried to name it other things. Gratitude, admiration, respect. They are there, but they are not enough. When you are not in the room, I look for you. When you are, the air feels more possible. You have changed the way I think, the way I speak, the way I face my own reflection. I do not know how to be the man I wish to be without you near." She closed her eyes briefly. "I do not fall easily," she said. "I learned too young how quickly the ground can vanish. I told myself I would never give any man the power to unmake me." "And have you?" he asked gently. She opened her eyes. "No," she said, because I do not believe you would use it, even if I did. Somewhere between the first night you refused my hand and the day you knelt in my sitting room, something shifted. I watched you choose humility over habit. I watched you face your father's letter and sign your own. I watched you change because you knew you must. That did more to move my heart than any romantic speech could have done. Is that your way of saying you care for me? He asked, a hint of hope in his tone. Yes, she said simply. It is. He let out a breath that sounded very much like relief. Then I will ask properly, he said, and before she could stop him, he was on one knee again, not in desperation this time, but in offering. Eleanor Whitford, he said, looking up at her. Will you marry me? Will you stand beside me in every room, argue with me over every ledger, laugh at my stubbornness, and share whatever years I have, not as my ornament or my shadow, but as my equal? Her eyes stung. For a moment the past and present overlapped, his refusal in that glittering room, his supplication in her modest house, his sincerity now. Yes, she said, her voice shaking. On the conditions stated and a few yet to be invented, yes, I will. He laughed, actually laughed, and took her hand. He did not rush to his feet. Instead, he kissed her fingers gently, then rose and drew her a little closer. May I? He asked quietly. She understood. She nodded. He bent his head and pressed his lips to hers, soft and reverent, nothing more than a promise made warm. The world did not vanish. She was too practical for that, but it blurred at the edges, leaving only the sense of being precisely where she was meant to be. When they parted, she was smiling, breathless, but steady. Now what? She asked. Now, he said, we face the room, again. Only this time, if anyone dares whisper, they will do so knowing that the woman they whisper about has the power to cancel their loans. She laughed. That is not a romantic statement, Your Grace, she said. It is the most romantic I have, he replied. I fell in love with your mind. You cannot expect me to stop speaking like a man who understands interest. They returned to the main room together. The shift in their manner did not go unnoticed. Bexley's eyes widened. Mrs. Whitford leaned forward, hand to her heart. Hawthorne caught the host's eye. Bexley, he called, I must impose upon your hospitality once more. My house is already in tatters from tonight's revelations, Bexley said cheerfully. You may as well finish it off. What now? A brief announcement, Hawthorne said. Then I will stop assaulting your guests with my voice. He turned to the crowd again. This time, he did not move to the center. He simply stood where he was, Eleanor's hand on his arm. One more thing, he said. Since I have already shocked you once, I may as well complete the task. Miss Whitford has done me the great honor of agreeing to become my wife. The room reacted as if a stone had been tossed into water. Gasps, exclamations, a few delighted claps, a few murmurs of disapproval muffled quickly. Mrs. Whitford pressed a handkerchief to her eyes, half laughing, half crying. Wycliffe raised his glass toward them in a small, wry salute. To the destruction of old rules, he murmured, and the birth of something less dull. Some guests came forward to offer congratulations, others to hide their confusion behind stiff smiles. There were frowns from those who thought a duke should not stoop so low, and bright eyes from younger ladies who saw something new breaking the surface of their world. Later, when the night was nearly over, Hawthorne and Eleanor sat side by side in a quieter corner. Her mother had joined them, still blinking back tears. I never imagined, Mrs. Whitford said, that the name that once broke us would be tied to yours in this way. It will not break her, Hawthorne said firmly. I give you my word. I will break him first, Eleanor said lightly, if he attempts it. Mrs. Whitford laughed shakily. You may try, she said. He looks sturdy. But then, so did your father in the beginning. Hawthorne sobered. I cannot promise there will never be strain, he said. No marriage is as tidy as a ledger. But I can promise this. I will not hide from her or from you. If I err, I will say so. If I falter, I will let her see it. That is more than my father knew how to do. Mrs. Whitford studied him. I believe you, she said at last. I do not know that I ever thought I would believe a duke again. Then we are already ahead of expectation, he replied. Months later, at Hawthorne's northern estate, the air smelled of damp earth and new beginnings. Eleanor walked beside her husband along a path that cut between fields. Tenants greeted them as they passed, tipping hats or nodding with shy respect. Children peered from doorways, curious about the lady who carried a ledger instead of a fan. "How do the numbers look?" Hawthorne asked, half teasing. "Better than they did," she said. "Not perfect. However, I am beginning to believe perfection is an illusion." "You had not realized that before," he said. "I had suspected," she answered. "You confirmed it." They stopped on a small hill. Below, the patchwork of land stretched, not as mere property, but as lives in motion. "We have done some good," he said quietly. "We have begun," she replied. "The rest will be in the daily choices, the dull work. That is where most futures are saved or lost." He looked at her, the wind catching a loose strand of her hair. "Do you ever regret," he asked, "not signing with Wycliffe?" She smiled. "Sometimes," she said. "When you are particularly stubborn, I imagine a life where I advise a man who argues less. Then I remember that such a man would bore me to tears." He laughed. "I am glad to be your preferred irritation," he said. She took his hand. "I do not regret the path we chose," she said more seriously. "I regret only that my father did not live to see this day." Hawthorne squeezed her fingers. "Perhaps," he said, "we can live it in such a way that wherever he is, he would be proud." "I think," she replied, "he already is." They stood there a while, hand in hand, watching the land they had nearly lost and had saved together. The Duke, who had once refused a commoner's touch, now held it as if it were the clearest sign of his own redemption. Life did not become simple. It never does. There were disputes, poor harvests, stubborn neighbors, and the enduring weight of expectation. But there was also laughter over ledgers, midnight conversations by the fire, shared decisions, and the quiet comfort of knowing that when one stumbled, the other would not stand aside and watch. In the end, what began as a humiliation became a hinge. A refused handshake turned into a bond that no scandal could undo, a partnership that turned pride into humility, injustice into repair, and chance meetings into chosen vows. And if in years to come someone in London whispered, "Do you remember when the Duke of Hawthorne would not touch that woman's hand?" there would always be another voice to answer, "Yes, and do you see how he has held it ever since?" Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.